Navajo Nation. There's going to be a little plaque coming up on the right side of the road that I'll point out. So everything you see in front of you at this point is Navajo Nation. All that land, all that red rock. So I'll point it out, we're about to leave the state of Arizona technically. No passports required though, you're good. So here you go, there's a plaque right here on the right side of the road. It says, kind of hard to see, but it says U.S. Department of Interior, the boundary of the Navajo Reservation. See if you can spot that right there. So we are now on Navajo Nation. Immediately to your left, the infrastructure changes quite significantly. So this is the largest reservation in the United States. It's about the size of West Virginia, so it's really, really big. And there's only about 300,000 people who live on this reservation. So think about that. State of West Virginia, 300,000 people, that's a lot of land that doesn't have a lot of people on it. So it's a lot of undeveloped land, kind of like this. Some horses out there to our right.
300,000 people? I don't even see one.
Yeah, you'll see maybe a couple today. So I'm going to talk a good amount about the Navajo people and Navajo Nation, partly for two reasons. One, I don't think a lot of Americans or people really know about what the lifestyle is like here on the reservation. I personally think it's, and a lot of people believe it's a third world country stuck inside the U.S., which is kind of crazy. And then two, I like to talk about them because I'm very fortunate enough to have several Navajo friends who grew up on the reservation. I teach Navajo students who've shared stories with me, so I feel like I've learned a lot about the Navajo culture from the source instead of hearing it from like maybe a textbook or things like that. So hopefully I get to kind of share a nice unbiased approach to real life here on the reservation. And reservation life is, like I said, it's tough. It's kind of like a third world country. About a third of the people on the reservation still don't have electricity. A third of the people still don't have running water, so they have to haul their water. Some of my students that I've taught tell me that the first time they ever had a microwave and a flushable toilet was when they got to a dorm room on campus. So think about that. I mean, most people go to college and their dorm rooms are a downgrade from what they grew up in, but for these people that live out here, it's luxury. It's a big luxury. One of my students told me that he didn't even know like what microwavable popcorn was, and so his roommate introduced him to microwavable popcorn and on a microwave because he didn't have one. Pretty fascinating things like that. But the Navajo culture, they struggle for work, they struggle for jobs. There's not a lot of revenue out here or jobs. A lot of them actually don't even work on the reservation. They commute into Flagstaff or they commute into other surrounding towns and they work there. But you will see things like this on the side of the road here on the right. Vendor stations where they're selling their jewelry, their pottery, maybe some of their arts and crafts, or maybe some of their rugs as well. The leading revenue in Navajo Nation is tourism, actually. Hiring people to do tourism is pretty big for them. And second is their arts and crafts and things like that, their jewelry, their handiwork. But Navajo Nation tries to be a self-sufficient nation, so they try to do everything they can internally for their people. So they try to create their own energy, they have their own government system, they have their own education policies and systems, they have their own police system, all that kind of stuff. But unfortunately, it's often not enough for the people. So like power is a good example. Obviously, they don't have enough power for all their people, and even the power that they do supply to some people is actually borrowed from the U.S. government. So they can't even supply as much as they need for their people. And unfortunately, they have presidential elections just like we do, and sometimes their president swings, kind of like we have a swinging of a left and right president. They have a swinging also between presidents who are more focused on just helping out their own people, and there's a president that's more focused on trying to get help from outside the U.S. government. So sometimes they're really closed off to help, and then sometimes they're more open to help. So currently they have a president who is a little more closed off, so they don't really want help or support from any sort of government agencies or things like that, even though often many people believe that they need it. They need it quite desperately. There's high levels of poverty here, which is, it's really sad. It's really sad.
I have a question though.
Sure.
All these power lines that you see coming through,
yep.
I mean, this is obviously not their property, right? So
that's borrowed from the U.S. government. So
are they paying them to use that land?
Yep. So
some of the revenue that they get. Right?
Yep. That's right. And we just passed it, but back there is actually an elementary school, a pink elementary school. I mentioned that they have their own education system, so they don't actually have to abide by any government standards or state standards. They create their own, which is good and bad, right? I mean, it's good for their people, but it can be unfortunate if some of them go to college and then they're expected to know certain levels of things that maybe they weren't taught. So schools and universities are trying to get better at that, trying to make sure that even reservation schools are implementing certain policies to try to support students when they go to college. But actually at that school is where they teach their native language of Dene still. And Dene is often considered one of the top 5 most difficult languages to learn if you didn't grow up speaking it. And that's because it's a tonal language. It's similar to the languages you hear up in the Athabascan region of Alaska. And it's similar to the tonal languages you actually hear in Africa, in Central Africa. And in fact, the Dene was actually the original name for the Navajo people. So it wasn't until the Spanish came over and they would meet the people, and they noticed that when they would meet the Dene people, they would wear big knives around their necks. So they would call them the Navajo, and they would call them big knife or large knife. And over time that became Navajo, and the Navajo really liked that name because a large knife or big knife means lots of power, and they really liked that name. So we just entered Cameron, and this is the first chapter on this side of the reservation. So whenever I say chapter, it's really just the reservation language for town. So their towns are called chapters, and this is Cameron. So you might notice there's not a lot here. Actually, this is a fairly nice chapter because up ahead of us there's a Burger King, a Conoco, McAllister's. That is not everywhere in the reservation. Those are specifically here because they knew that tourists come through this area, and they want to supply potential areas of revenue and jobs, and so that's why they have this here. But many other places just kind of look like these homes out to our left and right. You might notice a lot of these homes aren't quite like foundational homes. They're more like modular homes or like maybe a mobile home, and that's because the foundation, the ground here, the clay is really hard to build on. It just crumbles infrastructure because it swells and contracts so much with rainwater. Even the roads get damaged all the time. They crack in half and they break, and so it can be pretty hard to upkeep. So a lot of people just don't want to deal with that, so they just get a modular, like a mobile home. Looks like someone actually is building a teepee out there to the right. I haven't seen that recently. So here we go. We'll start going west toward the Grand Canyon, only about 27 or so miles from the canyon. And here's the monoclimb right in front of us. We're going to continue to be on the reservation up until we kind of get to the entrance of the Grand Canyon. So the Grand Canyon is not on Navajo Nation. If you look out to your left, there's the peaks. The San Francisco peaks. Sorry, you can't quite see it right now. We just went behind this rock here, but as we kind of ascend, you might be able to spot it. If you're ever lost in northern Arizona, you need to find Flagstaff. Just point whatever you're driving to the mountains, and you'll eventually get there. You might have to go over Grand Canyon first, but you might get there. There you go. You can see the peaks right there. That's Mount Humphreys with the extra snow on this north side. So you might notice some of the homes here on the reservation, they kind of look like compound homes, lots of people living together, and that's very symbolic of the family structure on the Navajo Nation. They're very family oriented, so when I first met some of my Navajo friends, they used to tell me about their multiple moms and their multiple dads, and I was really confused by that. And they told me, I soon found out actually that they actually call their aunts and uncles and their grandparents mom and dad also, and that just symbolizes kind of the close family structure they have. So they really value living kind of in small communities, and they really value people staying on the land. Each year, more and more people are actually leaving the reservation, and it's a big fear for a lot of the older Navajo members that the younger kids are just going to go to college and never come back. They know that the people who are going to college are getting well educated, they want them to come back, but a lot of students, I don't want to generalize, but a lot of the students I've talked to don't want to return because they don't feel like there's as many opportunities for them. Very similar to the conversations you might hear in like inner cities like Chicago or St. Louis, things like that, where people are sending their kids to college and telling them, hey, Linda, and he was a tightrope walker, and he walked across the Grand Canyon, or he advertised as walking across the Grand Canyon. Well, his people actually contacted the National Park Service, and they didn't let him walk across the Grand Canyon because they were afraid he was going to fall and then they'd get in the news for the wrong reasons. So he actually came out here and did it on these canyons because the Navajo Nation allowed him to do it. So he's like a Red Bull athlete. There were like 50-mile-per-hour winds the day that he was doing it, but he had prepared for that by putting his tightrope in a airplane hangar and having a back ride in. That's pretty cool. Is he on? Oh, he's got his cell phone out. Oh, she does. Oh, look at that. That's awesome. I shouldn't assume that was just a guy. That's my bad.